Hi, I'm Deacon John Miller. I'm a deacon serving in the South West Wales Circuit and in Kilchdaith, Cymru, and I also serve the Wales Synod and Synod Cymru.
I am Deacon Lemian Kwela. I am serving in the North Norfolk Circuit. I am mainly working with St. Andrew's Methodist Church and Cromer Methodist Church. I've been a deacon since 2012, start of training.
Hi, I'm Lorraine. I'm a deacon as well, and I'm serving currently in a post called the Peak Park Rural Development Enabler, and that means I work within the Peak Park, crossing 3 district boundaries, crossing Notts and Derby, Sheffield and Manchester and Stockport.
And I'm Roger Walton, and I'm a retired presbyter. I'm living in Glossop, not too far away from the Peak Park, just on the edge of it. And the last few years I've been working on a Methodist way of life, and our conversation today is going to be about what it means to live by a rule of life. Now, deacons have lived by a rule of life for many years now, and it's become part of their pattern, part of their calling. So I'm going to ask my colleagues here, when you first got the sense of call to ministry, call to be a deacon, how much did you know about the rule of life for deacons?
I didn't know much about the rule of life. When I then got to know about the rule of life, I realized it's actually how we have lived as disciples, but I didn't know about the rule of life before I became a deacon.
I remember at my district interview being asked how I felt about living to a rule of life. And I think at that question, it became apparent to me that I didn't quite understand what they were asking of me, because I had already made that commitment to live my life as a Christian. So had already to some extent adapted to a rule of life in changing your lifestyle. But obviously I had a lot to learn.
I think for me, I didn't really know anything about the diaconal order. I felt called to ordained ministry, but I went on the foundation training pathway as it was. And during that, I had the opportunity to go on a diaconal order exploration weekend, during which they explained every bit about the diaconal order, from the rule of life to meeting at convocation and every aspect of it. And as soon as I heard about the rule of life, it was like, oh, that makes so much more sense to me. I needed something that was going to kind of keep me on the straight and narrow with what I was doing in ministry. So that became something very key to my sense of call.
So I'm guessing now that all of you knew nothing at the very beginning of this, and now you're living by this pattern of Christian living, which is specific to the diaconal order. I wonder what that feels like now, after the years you've been in ministry. What does it feel like?
It's a real comfort to me. I find it does help. I love the way John just said about it keeping him on the straight and narrow. And actually there is something about that rule of order calling you back to who you are. And the fact that when life is tough, sometimes it's actually a comfort. Right, stop, slow down, take time to pray, take time to look after yourself, take time to connect with your brothers and sisters in the order. And it really is a comfort and a leveling and a tool that really helps a healthy lifestyle for me.
For me, it was an attraction. It became an attraction because when I was between the age of 13 to 17, I went to a Catholic school which was run by nuns, and I've always wondered if at that time we actually lived by the rule, because we emulated, we admired the way the sisters lived. They lived amongst us in the boarding school. So when I then began to know about the rule of life, I realized it's something that, even though the rule is actually the expectation of every disciple, but the rule of life, living by the rule, is something that I could have experienced when I was living in a Catholic boarding school with Catholic nuns. So it became an attraction. It became something I actually could relate to as expectations of a Christian, but also as something I think I'd lived by before.
How does that work for you, John?
I was going to say, I remember that we were asked about what we thought of the rule of life during the training time. So when we went before DUCPOC, as it was then, the Diaconal Candidates Oversight Committee, they asked, well, what does the rule of life mean to you? And I remember saying that one of the things I used to like watching was Mock the Week, and Rory Bremner did an impression of, I think it was George W. Bush, and the voices that were inside his head, which were breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And I said that was very much for me what the rule of life was. It was this reminder to breathe in and to breathe out. You can't just do one the whole time. You have to do both of them. And it's just that constant reminder that there is this rhythm and this pattern, that you have to take in things so you can give things out.
Yeah. It feels like that image of breathing in and breathing out is kind of really a key one. I've certainly been thinking a lot about that kind of image when we've been developing Methodist way of life, sort of how you with God, how you with others, how you renew yourself, and then how you give out. And if you stop breathing in, it's not very healthy, and if you didn't breathe out, that would be pretty unhealthy too. So you kind of need that movement, don't you, in the process. I think some people maybe watching this will kind of have an idea of the rule. I think you pray often at this kind of same time of day, and you're in touch with your regional group, and you're part of convocation and so on. But tell me, how does it kind of work out on a daily, weekly, yearly basis for you?
We do have a regular prayer time, but that doesn't stop us developing our own prayer time. It's very much an enabling rule of life. And I think I would want that message to come over. So for me, I would say, if somebody asked me a little while ago, she said, how often do you pray? And I don't think I ever stop. I don't think, I think every day I wake up, good morning, God, and I'm in that constant conversation with God throughout the day. So it doesn't stop us having our own rhythm, but it reminds us of our connection and of the importance of the prayer. And so we do have the 20 to 11 time that we pray, 20 to 10, goodness me, the 20 to 10 time that we pray. But it's important to understand that it's not, it doesn't tie us, it frees us.
That's a really interesting notion that you expressed there, that it kind of connects you with other people, that particular part of it, but actually your prayer life is developing and growing and flowing all the time. I like that very much. What about Lemmy? How does that work for you?
For me, it is the prayer, the reminder for me to nurture my own spiritual life. But also there is the bits of the rule of life that encourages us to take a step back and reflect on the order of the day. Where was God in the conversations that we had? And that is something that links me with the relationships that I have with myself, with God, and with the community. It stops me to think about my relationships with the members of congregations, my relationships with the ministers I work with within the church or in other churches, and the agencies that I work with. That moment of reflecting allows me to think of how my ministry is going with everybody that I'm in touch with. Am I carrying the light of Christ everywhere I go? Am I carrying the character of Christ that I'm supposed to be presenting to those that I communicate with? So my moment of reflection is a moment in which I look at myself and my ministry and how I can carry on with my ministry the following day or the following weeks. So the rule of life is not just about my devotions, but it's also about my relationships, right. A reflection on my relationships, with God and with everybody else in the areas that I work.
Yeah, that idea of reflection of what's going on. Do you do that at kind of the end of the day? I mean, sometimes for me, that's a kind of important part of my prayer life at the end of the day, often when I've got into bed. You know, I have short devotions, but I'm kind of doing this examine, you know, just who have I met during the day, these days often on Zoom, or who have I been in contact with, what's going on for them, and so on, and kind of working out a little bit where God was and all that. Is that how you do it, or do you have different patterns?
It might not be like spot on at the end of the day. Sometimes it's even after a project or after a conversation, but sometimes you've got those moments of thinking, you know, or on your way home, you know, or when you're relaxing somewhere, just to reflect on conversations, or at the end of the week, reflecting on certain projects that you've been through, or certain situations that you have seen, or certain, you know, even disagreements that happen within the settings, but you begin to think, where was I right, where was I wrong, how can I do things better? So the moment of reflecting on yourself and on the conversations and on the ministries, whether it's at the end of the day or at the end of the week, but it's important in the sense that it nurtures not just the relationship with God, but also the relationship with the people that we see and we meet and we serve, you know, in the ministry.
Anything to add? Anyone else?
Yeah, I really would pick up on that bit that you've just said about reflecting at the end of each session or project. I find that really helpful, and sometimes taking that moment of time to stop and reflect is almost more helpful than at the end of the day, because other things happen. and sometimes that, okay, how did that event go? And beforehand we were discussing yesterday and 3 different situations that I was in yesterday, and it was really helpful at the end of each one to take time to examine what happened on that one. So yes, I'm with Lemmy on that, very much so.
Yeah.
I think I tend to do that sort of kind of automatically, but for me, I wish I was that organized that I would be able to say that this is what I do at these particular times, and after a meeting I will spend a bit of time and make sure I've got space for that. And more often than not I don't. I have dyslexia and ADHD, and I spend my entire life trying to hammer order onto my life, onto every day. My actual calendar is just full of alerts which go off at different times of the day saying you need to pray now, because otherwise I will forget it. And this is the rule could very easily become something which we feel guilty about because we don't do it. But I try and keep it so that it's just that constant reminder that actually it's still there, as that structure is still there for me to return to, even when I go completely off kilter and I find myself distracted by everything else that's going on. When it all gets a bit sort of spun out of control, I can just go, where am I supposed to be now? What am I doing? And I can look at that pattern, I can look at the order and go, yeah, right, let's start it again from here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, just picking up on what John said, that really links to me with that part of the discipline in our rule. And there's one part of the discipline that says making sure we have time for God's time, being aware of God's gift, such as time that we've been given, and taking time to appreciate the gifts that God has given us around us. And as you were talking just then, I was thinking about how sometimes I just need to be outside and I just need to take that time and making that time. And I think I'm going to just steal one of your ideas there and perhaps put an alarm on my clock just to make sure that I take more time to do that. So I'll just make a note of that.
It worked for Jesus, so
yeah. Hey.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned in passing, John, was when you fail at this, and when we've been inviting people to consider a Methodist way of life, people sometimes look at the list of commitments that are there, about praying every day, worshipping regularly with others, and seeking God each day, and living generously and hospitably, and sharing your faith and so on. Sometimes they look at it and think, oh goodness, I'm going to fail at this. And I'm guessing there must be times when you think, oh, I've messed this up. How do you make sense of that? And what do you do?
It's just part of being a Christian, really. I mean, all of this, the Methodist way of life, the diaconal rule of life, I think Lemmy mentioned it as well. This is not something in addition to being a Christian, we're really called to. This is just simply helping us to remember that it is there and this is what we're called to do. And we're told time and again in our Christian life that we will make mistakes, we will mess up, but there is always forgiveness. We can always turn around and come back again and start afresh. There is always the fresh start. There's always resurrection. And that's what I lean on. Some days more heavily than others, but that's what I lean on in this.
And speaking of forgetting or not really following, the rule, and then realizing that you're not quite where you would want to be. This is why I treasure part of the rule of life is being a group. We are a group of deacons that have taken a lifelong commitment. Part of the commitment is to support one another in our spirituality. And I think part of it is actually asking one another how we are doing in our spirituality, and if we are struggling, there's always the other deacons around us to support one another spiritually, and also with the idea that we always have a spiritual director. So when you feel like you're failing in your spirituality, there's always the other deacons who are committed. They have taken a lifelong commitment to support me spiritually. And there's also the spiritual director who's also available to support me, because it's part of the rule of life to have a spiritual director in our ministries and in our lives.
Yes, and the way it's written as well, in our devotional life and in our discipline, the words are, we will endeavour to. It doesn't say go away and beat yourself up because you failed. It says you'll endeavour to. It's a great word, isn't it? Like, it implies that you're always working at it, but it doesn't imply you've failed if you didn't get it.
Yeah, I mean, we prefaced the Methodist way of life commitments with the words, as far as we're able with God's help. And when I'm thinking about it with people who say, oh goodness, I'm going to fail at this, or I've already failed it before I started it, I say, well, it's as far as we're able, and it's by God's grace. And sometimes we're not able. I mean, if people, are seriously ill, then some things you can't do. And at those points, you need to remember, as I think Lemmy was saying, you're part of a community that does this. So even when you can't pray, and there are times for most of us when we can't pray, you still belong to a community that prays. And when you can't serve because physically you can't do things, you're part of a community that serves and shares its faith. So even when you can't do it, you are part of it. Is that how it feels?
Absolutely. And that commitment that we have a prayer day as well. I mean, to me, all these years down the line, I still feel so humbled by the fact that I find it quite emotional to even mention that my brothers and sisters in the order are praying for me personally, and I'm allowed to return that and pray for my brothers and sisters personally, and that's huge. For me, that's a huge thing.
Yeah, it's nice when the postie comes just before you've done your daily prayer and you've not realized it's your day, and a card turns up from one of the members of the order saying, thinking of you on your prayer day. And just that sudden reminder that even if you forget to pray for yourself, there are other people who are praying for you and your ministry, and it's incredibly supportive.
When I've been to the convocation, I was invited there one year, and so enjoyed convocation. It had a wonderful, like a very big family feel to it. Like everybody knew each other, and everybody delighted in one another's successes, and when people were having a bad time, there were always folk around them. It does feel like a very strong family bond. And I think many presbyters have thought, wish we had something like that. Of course, part of the answer to that is that, of course, the numbers allow it to happen. You can be in convocation and pretty much know everybody. Is that right? Is that how it feels, or have I got a rosy picture of it?
It's not a rosy picture at all. That's the way it is. It's we are that very close. That's how I feel. We are such a very close family, and convocation for me is a joy, because it's a time where it's also a time to reflect, you know, on a lot of areas of my ministry. But even without before we go to the convocation, we've got the area group. So even though we are a dispersed community where there is one deacon in every second, but because of the area group, that connectedness and that being a family is still experienced, together with the prayer diary, where you know the whole family is praying for you. So yes, it's not a rosy picture. I think there is that familyness and that connectedness and that linked that we are in the Methodist Diaconal Order that I treasure, because of the way the rule of life allows us to do that.
Yeah, I agree that that happens, that we're a family and we feel like we're connected. But in terms of the rosiness, some of us aren't very good at being indoors, and some of us aren't very good at sitting still all the time. So some of us do find it quite a challenge at times. But the challenge is not in being a community and being together. The challenge is being in an environment that isn't conducive to who we are. That's the challenge, not in the connectiveness. But it's a rule of life. We have to do it, and we do it, and we are enriched by it. So I think that's really important. And the other thing I would add, especially a few presbyters have said to me, I wish we had that. And I think the return has to be, you have to work at it, you know, it doesn't just happen. You could get a group of people together, but if they haven't worked at being part of that order, you wouldn't have that atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, going along with that, and the other thing that you said, convocation is immensely tiring.
Oh yes,
it's immensely joyful as well, but you kind of need a week off afterwards. So it's the evidence that actually you're not sort of on holiday, you're not partying at this thing. This is something you're working at, this community building. And one thing I've noticed as well is that we've got all these little networks that happen within convocation. You have your area group, but then the area group that you used to belong to, and the people that you trained with, and the people who supported you during your early days, the people who you went on work placements with, things like that. It's amazing the number of people that you know in such a short time within the order. And they are all wanting to know how you are, how things are going, what you're doing next. It's amazing. But I definitely need to lie down after convo.
Yeah.
I think you had the convocation by Zoom this year.
Twice.
Twice. What was that like? Was it more tiring? Did you get a sense of community in the same sort of way? Or what was it like?
I was dreading it, but it was actually all right. It was all right. It worked. I don't know what the other two felt, but that was my experience. Do you think it worked?
It did work. I think it's just being on the screen, you know, for long periods of time, but that's what that was tiring. But for me, also the connecting and catching up and the business that we managed to go through, it was a blessing. But I think it's the idea of the screen is all that matters. It's all that worries me. It's looking on the screen the whole time. But it worked. For me, it worked. Yeah.
I think it worked as well. I think we'd been engaged with this kind of media for a little bit before convocation happened. So we kind of gotten used to it a bit more. It wasn't as strange or as alien as it could have otherwise been. I mean, we've been using it in Wales for ages, because if otherwise you're traveling 7 hours for a 2-hour meeting. But to have this opportunity, it's been great for our area group as well, actually, because normally we had to sort of limit the amount of times that we meet just due to the distances involved, but we're meeting more frequently now in this format, and this has been very beneficial for us as a group. And so to have convocation in that format at that time wasn't quite as weird as it could have been, and there were things that we were able to do that we don't do when we're meeting in person. We had a very excellent retreat session, which was beautifully led, and I sat there and engaged with all of it, and normally I fidget and I wander off. But actually I was able to fidget and wander off and still be part of it, because I walked around with my phone. So it was quite nice.
I could come back a little bit to area groups. Occasionally, as chair of district, I got invited to the ones in our area, and they're clearly very supportive. But I'm kind of wondering about the relationship between the area group and your spiritual director, because I think you all have a spiritual director as part of the rule. So someone you share something of your own spiritual journey with. And the reason I ask the question is really about accountability. One of the things we've been exploring with Methodist Way of Life is finding someone you can share your journey with. I think that used to be a very big part of what it meant to be a Methodist. You would have been in a class meeting or a band in the early days, and it kind of, I wonder how it falls between those things. So I have a spiritual director, and that's a really important honesty place where I can say, I completely messed up on this, or I'm feeling really very bad about that, and so on, and actually some things are broken down in my spiritual rhythm, and so on. So I can be really honest. And I'm wondering for you, is that the same, or does your area group allow for that kind of honest accountability? How does it work?
Shall I go first? Yeah, I was just thinking that because every area group is so radically different, because we've got very different people in the area group, and the geography changes the way we interact as well, that actually it's different for every deacon in every appointment that we're in as to where the balance sits between what we talk with our spiritual director about, what we talk with our area group about, and indeed what we talk with our supervisor about in the supervision sessions. The key for us as deacons is to find ways to make these complement each other, so we're not having overlapping elements of work. My spiritual directors have often struggled at understanding exactly what it was to be a deacon, but they knew very well what it was to be a Christian in ministry, and so we focused more on that side of things, whereas my area group helped support me in what I was doing in my appointments, because more often than not, deacons are doing very weird and radically different things in every appointment we do. You speak to 2 deacons about what diaconal ministry is and you'll get 6 answers.
Yeah.
It changes so much, so frequently, that your area group are the ones who say, well, I've done something like that in my previous appointment, and this is what helped me keep with the rhythm of life and the rule of life during that time. Whereas the spiritual director kind of fills in the other gaps. At least it does for me anyway.
Yes, for me, it's a relationship dynamic. All relationships have their own dynamics, and the area group is a group dynamic, and the spiritual director is a one-to-one dynamic. And for me, that's where the difference is. Now, it might be in some area groups I felt I might form a close one-to-one dynamic with one of the deacons, but that would be different to the group dynamic. So I see the spiritual director very much as a one-to-one, almost more personal in a way, and almost more intense, not necessarily a level that I could function at for longer than that short amount of time, whereas the dynamic with the group is probably a more functionable level, if you like, on a daily group dynamic level.
I would also be careful what I bring to my colleagues and then what I take to the spiritual director, because you don't want to overload the colleagues with issues that might be better off taken to the spiritual director. So I would try and separate issues, separate conversations that I would have in the area group, and carry some of the most personal and most deeply spiritual stuff, take it to the spiritual director and have a one-on-one confidential conversation. Some of the conversations you may want to have, you are overloading a fellow deacon on issues that might as well just go to a spiritual director and might be better discussed there than with a fellow deacon.
What so I wonder if I could change the focus a little of the conversation. So you know that Methodism as a whole is taking up this Methodist way of life, and every member will be invited to share in that kind of journey. And this will be new for many people, and some people will have experienced living by rule of life. They might have been part of the Iona community or the Northumbria community or something similar, but for many it will be entirely new, the idea of a rule of life, a kind of rhythm for them. I wonder what you would, well, first of all, tell me what you've picked up about Methodist way of life, and also what you think, and do you think this is going to be of benefit, and what would you say to people who are thinking about taking up the invitation to live in this sort of way? Sorry, there are about 3 questions there, but take which ones you want.
You know, when I look at both the Methodist way of life and the our rule of life, it's what I was nurtured to endeavor to be from a very young age, because I grew up in Zimbabwe. And growing up, we had so many different groups in the Methodist Church. Like as little girls, we had the little girls groups on top of the Sunday school, and then we had the girls Christian unit, and then you've got the women's. So in all those areas, what we were being encouraged to be was exactly what the Methodist way of life is, and what the Methodist diaconal order rule of life is. So both they encourage us and teach us to respond to God's will and love, and to live like Christ. Both of them are encouraging us first to put Christ at the center, and then to take care of self, and then take care of the other, and take care of the communities that we live in. Both of them are just a reminder that it all starts within the church, and then it's all about our spirituality, it's all about our transformation. But then we also remember that we are transformed to transform others. It all flows with the Methodist diaconal order rule of life and the Methodist way of life. To me, it's the same things. It's all about us with God, and then us with the other, and then being sensitive to the needs and cares of the world. It's all encompassed in both of them.
I like the way that it's taken words that we are used to, take the 4 areas we know: worship, learning, caring, service, and evangelism. I think that's a really good start. I think it's great that because we can connect straight away. They're words that we know. I think it's great that it helps people focus. I think there's an urgency for this beyond the 1 hour a week on a Sunday. And I would say that one of the pitfalls we've fallen into is focusing on 1 hour a week on a Sunday. And this rule of life now will encourage people to think beyond that. And the bit that I really like is about it encouraging people to learn and care about themselves as well as others. And I would say we have a very bad habit in Methodism about valuing people by their busyness. And how much can you cram into a day? And we're all aware of those conversations where people feel obliged to say, I can't do that because, and give you a list of reasons why. And I think this encourages us to see us as a valued person in the eyes of God. And that means taking time for ourselves as well as for others. So I like all of that. I think the bit that I would struggle, well, I don't know that I struggle with it, that's different to a diaconate way of life, perhaps, is that we still have our commitment to each other and our area groups which bind us together. And maybe the Methodist way of life falls short of that, maybe.
Yeah, I think that was something which I picked up on a little bit, because it does talk about our links with our communities and caring for those around us, but it does kind of one step short of where we are with the order, where there is the accountability, but not a sort of strict accountability, but more of a kind of, I have a responsibility to look after you and to have you look after, and to allow you to look after me, which is quite a difficult thing for some of us to manage. And so I find that quite useful within the rule of life, particularly. I think as well, the rule of life has been written and put together to support and strengthen our ministry as deacons. There are parts of it which are very much there with particular emphasis, sure that we are not going to stretch ourselves further than we can go in our ministry, that they're there to support and maintain it. But I suppose in some ways the Methodist way of life is the same thing, because we've talked for years about how everybody in the Methodist Church has a ministry, whether it be lay or ordained, and this is a kind of an underpinning for that ministry for lay people as well as ordained people.
Yeah,
I was going to say something else. I completely
sorry, John. Carry on.
Now.
Had you finished, John? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say something else, but I completely forgot what it was.
Oh, we'll come back in with it as soon as it pops back into your head. I'm conscious of glad of what you said, Lorraine, because I think what we're encouraging with this is that people form voluntary kind of groups. So that might be with one other person or a group of 3 or 4. And sometimes I'm calling this kind of circles, although we haven't got a proper name for it yet. But not groups of 8 or 10, like in the sort of standard house group or Bible study, but a group of 3 or 4 where you can achieve something of the kind of honesty and vulnerability that I think often is the kind of growth to spiritual life. But it is voluntary, and for the order it's kind of given, it's required, isn't it, as part of the rule of life, and I think that is a significant difference. So it means that I think for those who are reluctant or resistant to this, that there is no sanction, there is no pressure. You can simply use this as a sort of reminder or even ignore it altogether. But for those who form a group, then that might well provide some of what you've experienced as a regional group. Am I right in that?
It might, yes, and I have heard of people who are now seeking to set up small groups, and people who had set up small groups during the lockdown and have then taken the way of life as a conversation. And I'm very aware that those groups have found it incredibly helpful. So that small group idea, I think, is helpful indeed. I don't think it can be anything but voluntary. And one of the important points that John picked up on was the fact that it can speak to both ordained and lay people. And of course, all of us in this conversation are ordained. So I think that that's really quite an important point, that the living to a way of life, and the Methodist way of life, encompasses everybody.
Remember what I was going to say, because it links in with what you just said, Lorraine, about during lockdown and all this move to online stuff, that there has been actually a big uptake, certainly in our area, of doing more things daily and no longer having this Sunday by Sunday, once a week thing. It's we've got regular reflections which are going up on Facebook pages, on church websites, and people are engaging with their faith and their spirituality far more than they ever did before. So this is coming at a really opportune time for the Methodist Church, as many of our members are rediscovering what it means to be a Christian every single day rather than just on Sundays. And as you said, people are forming these small groups in different ways, often not geographically bound as there would have been when we had the class meetings or the bands, but people are linking up in groups via Facebook, Twitter, Zoom, other means, with people all over the world who have sort of similar, who are like-minded in the way that they live out their faiths, and engaging in this discussion. And so to have something like this resource to help guide, support, and sort of give it some kind of structure is really, really good.
Yeah. I really interesting what you said about the kind of link-ups in different ways now. And this COVID period has, as if we hadn't discovered it already, as they obviously had in Wales, but we're discovering how to link with people in all sorts of ways, aren't we? And I'm conscious of a number of groups that are forming and using Zoom, and they often are over quite wide ranging. One of the most interesting has been, have you come across Methodist way of life yet? This is,
yes.
I
discovered it just yesterday, in fact.
This is superb. So James Morley, who started this, was a heavy metal fan in his earlier days, and actually had some bad experiences of going to church, I think, as somebody who was keen on this, and people weren't always welcoming. And in his sabbatical, he's kind of reconnected with that, and then with Methodist Way of Life has opened morning, I think, and evening prayers around Methodist Way of Life. And certainly the evening one I went to, they were just talking around one of the questions, and he was telling me that this is not a local thing anymore. There are some local people involved around Sheffield, but people are linking in from all over the place and different parts of the world who are metal fans, and at the same time wanting to develop their Christian life, and have not always been welcome elsewhere, and so they're connecting up. So it's a very interesting thing about connection and finding the place where we can get the help from others that we need to make the journey, I think. Where do you think the things are going for the diaconal order? I'm conscious that you're going to revisit the rule of life and work on that. I think this was signalled to conference. Was it 18 months ago, and it's being explored. How do you think it might change? What do you think might strengthen and develop the diaconal rule of life?
Maybe I am defensive of the rule of life. But, well, personally, I feel the rule of life is a list of rules, a set of rules that are there to guide. They're like a rule, they measure, And for me, it's okay as it is. For me, I felt that it was fine as it is, and it's just a tool that is needed for us to strengthen our spiritual life and the lives of those that we serve with. But personally, I think there is no need to develop it any further for me. For me, but as I said, probably I'm defensive of it. Yeah.
I welcome the review. I think it's right to do so. I've lived by this rule since a student. I started in 2002 as a probationer, so I'm very familiar with it. But I'm a big fan of revisiting and reviewing things. We have to be aware that the order is made up of so many different people. So the conversations we've had so far, we have people who are like, I know this and I love it. I've lived with it from day to day. Please don't change it. So we have that. And we have people that say it doesn't go far enough. We need to uphold that accountability more. So for me, the end product is important, but the whole journey, I think, is going to be the exciting thing, and about sharing and learning from that and how we can best engage with it. So I'm excited that we're reviewing it. I don't stand here with any firm commitment to it being something different. I'm up for the journey.
I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the rule of life, and maybe hate's a little bit strong, but just generally I'm not great with rules and boxes. I need them. I desperately need them in my life, but I also don't like sticking to them. So I've enjoyed this discussion that we've had about the way that we might change or reshape the rule of life. I honestly, having listened to so many of my sisters and brothers in the order talk about it, I don't think much of it's going to change. Possibly just the way we apply it might. The only notes I've ever really made in this that have come through more strongly have just been to just add in a little bit more theology, some more Bible verses, just to explain why it is we do what we do. And also a little bit more of an emphasis on what we are doing. We're very good at talking about the being, which is actually very important for a community of Marthas like we are, who like to be out there doing stuff. Yeah. We always need somebody to be telling us how to do the being bit. But I think as well, we do need a little bit in the rule of life about how we do ministry. But ultimately, we're given the space and the freedom to reshape the rule to fit our lives and our ministry. And you won't be able to see this very well on the camera, but mine's covered in notes. Scrawls all over it, including things like where it says, we will keep in contact with members of the order, and it says by visits, fine, and then but by letter or telephone. And I've put at the bottom, nope, that's terrifying for me. The idea of writing letters, calling people on the phone, I'm not comfortable with that. Zoom, I can manage, but and so I've shaped it to fit what works for me, and I think we're all encouraged to do that. And so the rule of life, while we are reviewing it as an order, I think we're encouraged to review it individually, whatever we come up with in the future.
And that learning the rule of life, I'm thinking back to my beginnings, if you like, way back when I was like, what are they asking me? What question are they asking me? And the importance of us growing with it from day one. I think that's really important, and linking that to what John was saying about the theology and understanding of why we choose to live by a rule of life, and growing into that. So if anything, the whole kind of journey of reviewing, I hope, will aid that learning for all of us from day one right through.
Yeah, and in some ways that idea of journey with the kind of review, whatever it produces, whether it produces nothing especially new, it is going to be a kind of reflection journey, isn't it, on what the experience has been, which I imagine will bring forth from people what their experience has been and how it shaped them, and therefore that will be enriching to everybody to share in. Yeah, I
very much hope so. I wonder if I could ask you a question.
Yeah.
Roger, it's just that we're talking about reviewing this rule of life, and yours is just, well, ours, the Methodist way of life, is just starting. So I wondered what ideas you had for this going forward. You've mentioned the small groups, but I wondered what other ideas, what journey do you think it might take?
Yeah, what we've done today is to produce a number of resources to support it, and we hope therefore it will, kind of work its way through the whole life of the Methodist Church. So most recent thing I'm told went up today is a preaching series set of notes for each of the commitments, and that's gone onto the website. It's free to download to anybody. That's alongside booklets of various kinds and videos, and what we've done up to this point is to concentrate on how to help people get into this, how to take up the invitation to live in this particular way, and forming of groups has been an important part of that. I think my kind of hopes for it are that that people will by adopting this rediscover some of the key things, and we've mentioned some of them already. So you mentioned getting away from the idea of 1 hour a week on a Sunday to every day, to all day, that all that is part of our Christian discipleship. I hope that people will discover that more deeply. I hope too that because of the encouragement to talk to somebody else, that people will recover talking about God. I think for many Methodists, that's a lost art now. I think people don't speak about God. So I take services, and I think the services have gone well, and then afterwards I go for coffee with people, well, when we could meet anyway, and nobody talks about God at all. And part of me thinks that's because it's not a structure that helps people to talk about God, and therefore I hope Methodist way of life will help people to rediscover that, and that when you talk about God with somebody else, another Christian, it just becomes more normal and natural to talk about God and how you saw God in the sunrise, or in the visitor that came to your house, or in the hospitality that was experienced in your community. When you start to talk to people about those experiences, it's not so difficult to talk about to people who are outside the church, because you can say, this is how I do it, and it's become normal for you. So I hope discovering every day, discovering ways of talking about God, discovering the kind of accountability that helps us grow. Accountability is not an easy word in our culture. It's often associated with performance and people's promotion, sorts of things like that. But I think in the Christian realm, it's about recognizing that honesty about where we are, as well as where we want to be, is a virtue and a growth point, so that it allows us to move towards what it is God wants for us and to be the human beings that God intends. So I hope people will rediscover that, and find that they're thinking about, what was it Lemmy said, reviewing all the time almost, and praying all the day, as you said, Lorraine. I hope that will become much more the experience of all Christians, all people who associate with us. And I hope too that for some of the new communities that are forming, so as well as the sort of churches that we're used to, of course they're changing too, but there are new places, aren't there, forming new communities. Sometimes we call them pioneer or fresh expressions or emergent communities, and I think for some of the people in those communities, the idea of being a member of the Methodist Church not very attractive. It feels like institution, and so they resist it. But the idea of living a Christian pattern day in, day out with your community supporting each other, I think is very attractive. So I think that for many of the new communities, it may be a resource around which they can form their Methodist identity, because these things are rooted, as you said, Lorraine, in the things that are familiar to Methodists, which go right back to the beginnings. The prayer and worship, the learning and caring, the service, the evangelism, those things are a big part of our life. So that these new communities that emerge, it may help them to be focused, and some of them may use it as is, and some of them may use it as a starter for developing their own sort of rule of life to help them focus on what it is they believe God's calling them to do and be in the world. So that's a cluster of things that I hope the Methodist way of life may help to form in God's people.
Thank you. I find it quite exciting, just even in the early conversations that I've been involved in, that people are looking towards something, and have found many times people wanting to do something to act out their Christian life, but say, I don't know what to do. I want to help. I don't know what to do. I want to be closer to God. How do I do that? And I think that this goes some way to addressing those conversations and to moving forward. So very grateful for it.
Mm. Any final words, Lemmy?
The rule of life, as we opened the conversations earlier today, talking about how we feel about the rule of life, and for me, sitting here, looking at the Methodist way of life and the rule of life, and to firmly say that I am committed to living by the rule of life. I've taken a lifelong commitment to live by this set of rules. And my hope and my desire is that in the way that I live, I may be able to, it may be able to be seen by others, so that even by not knowing who I am, people may be able to know the kind of life that I live. Remember when I spoke about the school I went to, and we liked to follow the way the nuns used to live. We loved their way of life. It is my prayer that because I am a person who is living by the rule of life, may my life be an example that will bring people to be able to live in a way of Christ.
Thank you so much. I want to say thank you to Lorraine and to Lemmy and to John for this conversation, and we hope that if you're watching in on this, this will help you explore a little bit what it means to live by a rule of life.